TK Force requested that I review an indie horror film by the name of Gitchy, which was first released to any audience in 2009, but released to a wide audience in early 2010. Sorry that I'm only just now getting around to this, though I've just come into quite a bit of free time that I'd always hoped I'd have. But getting back to Gitchy, I think it's important to note its development before jumping into just what it is. The film is short, only a little over 30 minutes long. Of course, clearly just by looking at it, yes, it's an indie film, though apparently it's done pretty well in a few small indie film festivals. It's not the worst indie film I've ever seen. It's certainly better than Birdemic, and as far as a fully comprehensible movie and story is concerned, it certainly does better than The Room. To briefly describe the plot, a brother and sister are suffering from the loss of their parents who both suddenly died of a heart attack on the same night, but the brother is convinced that his parents were tickled to death by a clown named Gitchy. Gitchy, of course, refers to the tickling sound of Gitchy Gitchy Goo! And the next half hour, you as a member of the audience are treated to surreal imagery of people getting delightfully and freakishly attacked by an overweight clown who wants nothing more than to tickle his victims past the point of exhaustion, possibly all the way up to death. The producers of the movie bill it as a horror comedy, much like The Room's advertising will try and tell you it's a drama comedy, but I honestly can't tell whether or not they ever intended for it to be funny. I can at least say this much about its promotion. The official website looks like it was built on GeoCities, and the only way you can get this movie is through them officially on DVD or through Amazon, either by renting it or purchasing it, or one of their other purchase and stream options. It's both easy and difficult at the same time to acquire the film. And in researching exactly what this movie was supposed to be or who these people were who made the movie, I found the director advertising about it on a set of forums. The Tickling Media Forum, world's largest and friendliest online tickling community. And with tens of thousands of tickling stories, images, and videos, we are also the most diverse and comprehensive showcase for community artists, writers, and producers. Okay, that only sounds a little bit bad. Certainly not as bad as I was... Great. Well, either the movie was created as a fetish to begin with, or the director knew exactly who it was he was going to gear it toward. But don't worry, even though the movie goes into weird directions and does in fact include swearing, it never really gets visually not safe for work. But you might get really, really, really uncomfortable. I can't hardly critique it on things like acting or cinematography or anything like that, because critiquing an indie film as such could be a low blow. And having made an indie movie before, I know what it's like to simply work with what you have. But there are some good things about its production. Like, really, most of the actors aren't complete crap. They're people who are obviously just starting out, and perhaps with some time they could really grow into something. In fact, the doctor who treats the brother David's supposed mental illness is possibly the most legit actress in the whole film.
Your sister told me that she heard you saying something in your sleep. She said you cried out the word Gitchy?
There are a lot of times when the camera is perhaps a bit too stationary, but then there's also some decent creative angles and good red horror lighting at the right time. In that sense, cinematically speaking, it's really not a complete disaster. And in another sense, I suppose the movie actually does its job. The clown is legit creepy, and I am 100% completely uncomfortable with all the tickling that happens in this movie. Now, that could be due to a few reasons, I suppose. I hate being tickled. Tickling hurts. Tickling is pretty much the farthest thing from enjoyable I can possibly think of. But, I don't know, it doesn't outright scare me. It's the degree to which the tickling is pushed in this movie. I mean, obviously, for the sake of the film, the tickling goes too far because people get tickled to death. But visually speaking, there are certain moments where it's really clear where the fetish comes in. At one point, David is left all by himself in the house and Gitchy shows up and starts tickling him. And then suddenly the clown also decides that David's feet look delicious, then starts piling whipped cream onto his foot. We're left seeing this traumatized young man who's been left alive, holding himself, rocking back and forth, with clown saliva drenching his feet, and that's its own completely different kind of unsettling. There are multiple times throughout the movie where I can't help but feel like you could have switched tickling for rape and gotten the same movie. Like tickling was just the lighter, friendlier replacement for what they actually wanted to film. And I wouldn't jump to the rape conclusion lightly, but if you consider that this is more than likely somebody's fetish, and not a single person being tickled in the film is willingly being tickled, I think the rape conclusion starts to become more logical. To get into what may be spoiler territory about the movie, there are a few things that don't completely make sense, and it's hard for me to tell whether that's because the movie only has 30 minutes to work with, or because the script was lacking in places. David and his sister Kimberly's parents die of a supposed heart attack at the exact same time on the exact same night, and nobody except for David, the guy who can see the clown in his head, ever stops to say, "Gee, that sure is a strangely fishy coincidence." Or the fact that, as people are getting tickled, only Kimberly ever tries to fight back against her attacker, and nobody else ever tries to throw a punch or a jab or a knee or anything like that. I know when I've been tickled, I've accidentally punched or kneed somebody in the face in my body's own manner of self-defense. Why does nobody else in this movie do that? Also, Gitchy appears to go from person to person within a small area, attacking people this family seems to know. But aside from Kimberly's boyfriend, I can never really tell whether or not any of the people were actually tickled completely to death. I mean, I guess they were. We never come back to them anyway. And then finally there's this guy, who calls himself Christopher. Just Christopher. He explains at the end of the movie, major spoilers here, that Gitchy was a real dude who really was a clown, and he liked to tickle kids in the neighborhood until they told him to stop. But Christopher never told him to stop. And it turned out he became sexually attracted to Gitchy. But then one day some parent in the neighborhood shot Gitchy in the head, but nobody knew who did it. But even the ghost Gitchy, or whatever the hell he is, now seeing Christopher one last time, thinks there's something really mentally disturbed with Christopher, and then he just burns up and disappears, I guess? What, so Gitchy didn't get aroused by all that tickling and is just so pissed off at the idea of it that he just ceases to exist? That doesn't make much sense. And then there's this line.
I don't know how you did it, but somehow, some way, you brought Stanley back.
What? Just look at David's face! He's just as confused as I am! Like, a little explanation here? Why would anything David ever did within what we've seen here in the movie have caused Gitchy to return as some kind of unexplained tickle ghost monstrosity? But Christopher doesn't explain it. He just walks away, leaving you to ponder, what was this even all about? Aside from the creepy underlying tickle fantasy, the movie could be really good. But the ending makes you really wonder what the point was. Maybe that was the point. Maybe you weren't supposed to get it. Maybe you were supposed to think about it. Or maybe the entire point was a tickle fetish, and the writing was never supposed to matter if tickling and clowns floats your boat. My recommendation, don't buy this thing unless clowns or tickling or something really friggin' floats your boat. Go rent it off of Amazon for $2 if you really need to know and understand what this movie is. It was suggested to me that perhaps this movie had its problems, but maybe it could be an interesting animated movie. Yeah, well, maybe, I guess. Maybe under a Japanese ecchi animation studio geared at a very specific audience, but if that happened, there'd probably be a lot more cleavage and panty shots. I don't know. If it existed, I don't think I'd willingly want to watch it. But despite this not being my kind of movie, it isn't as though I don't feel somewhat enlightened by its existence. I feel like when other people introduce me to new things, I learn something new about amateur filmmaking. And so even movies I don't care for can give me insight I never had before. So thanks again, the TK Force. I hope it was worth the wait.